The glass door of Giovanni's bistro reflected the Manhattan skyline as Everett Caldwell stood frozen. On the threshold, his hand gripping the brass handle so tightly his knuckles turned white. Through the rain-streaked window, he saw her, Marisol, his ex-wife, sitting at a corner booth with soft candlelight dancing across her face. But it wasn't her presence that made his heart stop. It was the small boy beside her, carefully coloring on a placemat, his dark hair falling across his forehead in a way that made Everett's chest constrict with recognition. What would you do if you saw your ex-wife with a child who looked exactly like you? Welcome back to Mr. Roman's Story Vault, where we share stories that touch the heart and challenge the soul. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and join our growing family. Today's tale will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about love, secrets, and second chances. Have you ever had a moment where your entire world shifted in seconds? Where everything you believed to be true suddenly crumbled like a house of cards? That's exactly what happened to Everett Caldwell on this rainy Tuesday evening in New York City. 5 years. That's how long it had been since his divorce from Marisol. 5 years of burying himself in board meetings, merger acquisitions, and quarterly reports. 5 years of telling himself he was better off alone, that love was a luxury he couldn't afford in his climb to the top of the corporate ladder. His corner office on the 47th floor of the Caldwell Industries building was a testament to his success. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, Italian leather furniture, and awards lining the walls. He had everything a man could want, except the one thing money couldn't buy, a family. The boy in the restaurant lifted his head, and Everett's breath caught. Those eyes, deep brown with flecks of gold, were mirrors of his own. The child's nose, the shape of his jaw, even the way he tilted his head while concentrating. It was like looking at a photograph of himself from 30 years ago. But how could this be possible? Marisol had never mentioned a pregnancy. Their divorce had been clean, mutual, they'd said. No children involved. Just two people who'd grown apart, or so he'd believed. The rain intensified outside, drumming against the windows as other diners chatted happily, oblivious to the drama unfolding at the entrance. Everett's mind raced through calculations. The boy looked about 4, maybe 5 years old. The timeline. God, the timeline matched perfectly with their separation. Here's the thing about secrets. They have a way of revealing themselves when you least expect it. And sometimes, the cost of keeping them hidden is far greater than the price of telling the truth. How many precious moments had already been lost? First words, first steps, bedtime stories, birthday candles blown out without a father's proud smile watching. Inside the restaurant, Marisol laughed at something the boy said, reaching over to ruffle his hair with a tenderness that made Everett's heart ache. She hadn't seen him yet, still lost in her own world, a world he'd been excluded from. The boy held up his drawing, and even from this distance, Everett could make out 3 stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. A family. This is where their story truly begins, not with anger or accusations, but with a successful man standing in the rain, watching the life he never knew he'd lost. A man who'd spent years building an empire, only to discover that his greatest treasure had been kept from him. What drives someone to hide such a monumental secret? Fear? Pride? Protection? And what happens when that secret walks into a restaurant wearing a dinosaur t-shirt and your eyes? Before you judge Marisol too harshly, remember that every secret has its reason, and every choice carries consequences that ripple through time like stones thrown in still water. Tonight, those ripples would become waves that would either destroy what remained of their connection or wash them toward a shore they'd never imagined possible. Everett's hand trembled on the door handle. In the next few moments, he would have to make a choice, turn around and preserve his carefully constructed life, or step inside and face a truth that would change everything. The story you're about to hear will challenge everything you believe about forgiveness, family, and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. So settle in, grab your favorite beverage, and prepare yourself for a journey that proves sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected revelations. Everett's world before. The mahogany desk in Everett Caldwell's office held no family photos, no children's drawings, no evidence of a life beyond corporate victories. At 42, he commanded Caldwell Industries with the precision of a master chess player, each move calculated, each decision final. The leather chair that had molded to his form over countless late nights was his throne, the city lights below his kingdom. Morning began at 5:30 a.m. sharp, with black coffee and financial reports. By 6:15, he was in his Tesla, heading to the office while the city still slept. His days blurred together in a symphony of conference calls, signatures on million-dollar deals, and brief nods to employees who both feared and respected him. Lunch was whatever his assistant ordered, eaten while reviewing contracts. Dinner came from whatever restaurant was closest to the office, usually. Consumed alone while his laptop glowed with tomorrow's challenges. The divorce had carved out something essential from him, though he'd never admit it aloud. Marisol had been the one person who'd seen past the Armani suits and corporate armor. She'd known him when he was just Everett, not CEO Caldwell, not the man featured. In Forbes, just a guy who liked old jazz records and Sunday morning crosswords. Their marriage had lasted 7 years before the cracks became canyons too wide to bridge. "You're married to that company," Marisol had said during their last real conversation, her voice hollow with defeat. "There's no room for me anymore." He'd wanted to argue, to promise things would change, but the words died in his throat because they both knew the truth. Caldwell Industries had become his identity, his purpose, his escape from feelings too complicated to examine. The settlement had been generous, he'd made sure of that. Marisol had refused alimony, taking only what she'd brought into the marriage, and disappearing from his life as quietly as autumn leaves falling from trees. No drama, no public battles, just 2 signatures on papers that dissolved 7 years into nothing. Giovanni's Bistro had become his refuge after the divorce. The small Italian restaurant, tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop, offered anonymity and excellent pasta. The owner, Giovanni himself, knew to seat Everett at the back corner table where he could eat in peace, away from business associates and social climbers. It was his Tuesday routine: leave the office by 8, walk the 12 blocks regardless of weather, and spend an hour pretending to be just another customer enjoying authentic carbonara. The walk cleared his head, let him shed the day's victories and defeats. Tonight was no different, except for the rain that had started during his final meeting. His driver had offered the car, but Everett waved him off. He needed the walk, needed the rhythm of his footsteps on wet pavement, needed the anonymity of being just another figure with an umbrella in a city of millions. 5 years. Sometimes it felt like yesterday, sometimes like a lifetime. He'd thrown himself into work with renewed vigor after the papers were signed, building Caldwell Industries into a force that commanded respect across 3 continents. Yet on nights like this, with rain blurring the city lights and couples hurrying past sharing umbrellas, he wondered what might have been different if he'd chosen differently, loved differently, been different. But that was the past, and Everett Caldwell didn't dwell on the past. He conquered the future. The warmth of Giovanni's embraced him as he stepped inside, shaking rain from his coat. The familiar scent of garlic and basil, the soft Italian music, the gentle clink of wine glasses, all of it usually calmed him instantly. But tonight, something made him pause just inside the entrance. His usual table was occupied. Not unusual. Giovanni would have another spot ready. But as his eyes adjusted to the intimate lighting, scanning the dining room, they stopped. At a corner booth where candlelight illuminated a scene that shouldn't exist, Marisol, after 5 years of carefully maintained distance, there she sat, looking almost exactly as he remembered. Her auburn hair was shorter now, framing her face in soft waves. She wore a simple blue dress, nothing like the designer pieces she'd favored during their marriage. But it was her smile, that genuine, unguarded smile he'd fallen in love with 15 years ago, that made his chest tighten. She was smiling at a child. The boy couldn't have been more than 4 or 5, his small hands carefully maneuvering a crayon across paper. He wore a green dinosaur t-shirt and had a habit of biting his lower lip. While concentrating, a gesture so familiar it made Everett's knees weak. Because Everett did the exact same thing when focused on difficult problems. The child's profile was visible as he turned to show Marisol his drawing, and the resemblance hit Everett like a physical blow. The boy's dark hair fell in the same unruly pattern Everett fought every morning. His nose, slightly upturned at the tip, the shape of his ears, the line of his jaw, even the way he gestured with his hands while talking. It was like watching old home videos of himself. Time seemed to stop. The restaurant noise faded to a distant hum as Everett's mind raced through possibilities, each more impossible than the last. This couldn't be happening. There had to be an explanation. A nephew, perhaps? Some cosmic coincidence? But the math was merciless. The boy's age aligned perfectly with their separation. Those final months of their marriage, when they'd tried one last time to reconnect, to save what they'd built together. A weekend in the Hamptons that had felt like a breakthrough, only to crumble weeks later when another crisis at work pulled him away from their anniversary dinner. His hands trembled as he gripped the host's stand for support. Giovanni appeared at his elbow, concerned, but Everett barely heard the man's greeting. His entire focus remained on that booth, on the child who might be, who had to be, his son. Marisol hadn't seen him yet, too engaged in whatever story the boy was telling her, face animated with the kind of joy he'd rarely seen during their final year together. The child gestured, wildly, nearly knocking over his juice glass, and Marisol's laugh carried. Across the restaurant, a sound that transported Everett back to better days. How was this possible? How could she have hidden this from him? The divorce proceedings had been straightforward. No mention of pregnancy, no child support discussions. His lawyers, the best money could buy, would have uncovered any hint of a child. Unless she'd discovered the pregnancy after the papers were signed. Unless she'd chosen to keep this secret rather than complicate their clean break. The boy turned again, this time facing Everett's direction fully, and the impact was devastating. Those eyes, his mother's warm brown but with flecks of gold that caught the light exactly like Everett's own. The determined set of his small shoulders, the way he held his head with unconscious confidence. This wasn't just resemblance, this was recognition at a cellular level. His son. The words formed in his mind without permission, carrying a weight that threatened to buckle his knees. He had a son, and he'd missed everything. First words, first steps, first day of school. 4 or 5 years of life, of moments that could never be reclaimed, of memories that belonged to someone else. The host touched his arm gently, asking if he was all right, if he needed to sit down. Everett managed to shake his head, his voice lost somewhere between shock and rage, and a grief so profound it felt like drowning. He had to approach them, had to know for certain, had to understand how his entire world had been rewritten without his knowledge. But how do you walk up to a table where your ex-wife sits with a child who might be yours? How do you form words when your throat has closed with emotions you'd spent 5 years avoiding? How do you claim a life you never knew existed? Everett's feet moved without conscious command, carrying him across the restaurant with the inevitability of gravity. Each step felt both too fast and agonizingly slow. Other diners blurred into background noise as he navigated between tables, his focus laser-sharp on the booth ahead. Marisol noticed him when he was 10 feet away. Her animated expression froze, color draining from her face as recognition dawned. Her hand instinctively moved to the boy's shoulder, protective, possessive, or perhaps simply seeking anchor in a moment when the past crashed into the present. Everett. His name left her lips as barely more than a whisper, but he heard it clearly, along with everything it contained, surprise, fear, and something else. Guilt? He stopped at their table, acutely aware of how he must look. Rain-dampened suit. Probably pale as death, hands clenched at his sides to stop their trembling. The boy looked up at him with curious eyes, no fear in that innocent gaze. Just mild interest in the stranger who'd made his mother go so still. Marisol. He managed her name with more composure than he felt. I didn't expect to see you here. She swallowed hard, her fingers tightening on the boy's shoulder. Luis loves the spaghetti here. Her voice cracked slightly on the child's name. Luis. His son had a name. Luis. Luis. Everett repeated, tasting the name, feeling its weight. His eyes moved between mother and child, cataloguing every familiar feature, every piece of evidence his spinning mind could grasp. That's a nice name. The boy, Luis, tilted his head, studying Everett with those impossibly familiar eyes. "Are you Mommy's friend?" he asked, his young voice clear and confident. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Friend, is that what they'd been reduced to? Former lovers, former spouses, former everything, now standing on opposite sides of a secret that could reshape everything. "Yes," Marisol answered quickly, too quickly. "This is an old friend. Everett, this is Luis. Luis, say hello." The boy offered a small wave, then immediately returned to his drawing, unaware of the earthquake happening above his head. Everett noticed the paper now, 3 figures under a yellow sun, just as he'd glimpsed from outside. But now he could see details. The tallest figure had brown hair like Marisol. The smallest had dark hair like Luis, and the middle figure was crossed out with black crayon, as if erased from the family portrait. How old is he? The question emerged rougher than intended, carrying too much weight for casual conversation. Marisol's jaw tightened. 4.5. Each word seemed to cost her effort. He'll be 5 in January. January. Everett's mind performed rapid calculations. 5 years ago, January would have been right after their separation, which meant conception would have been those final weeks. That last, desperate attempt to save their marriage. He looks. Everett paused, searching for words that wouldn't explode the careful fiction Marisol seemed determined to maintain. He reminds me of someone. Her laugh was brittle, artificial. People say that. He has one of those faces, I guess. Very classic features. Classic features. As if the child wasn't a mirror image of every Caldwell family photo going back generations. As if those weren't his grandfather's hands in miniature. His father's. Stubborn chin, his own eyes looking back at him with innocent curiosity. "Mommy, I'm hungry," Luis announced, saving them from the mounting tension. "Can we order now?" "Of course, sweetheart." Marisol's voice softened instantly when addressing her son. Their son. And she reached for the menu with hands that shook slightly. "What do you want tonight? Your usual?" Everett remained standing, frozen between invitation and dismissal. Part of him wanted to grab the table, demand answers, force the truth into the open. Another part wanted to run, to pretend he'd never walked through that door, never seen what couldn't be unseen. "Would you?" Marisol's voice faltered. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Would you like to join us? I mean, if you haven't eaten already." The invitation surprised them both. Luis looked up with interest, apparently pleased by the prospect of company. His small face held no guile, no hidden knowledge, just the simple hope that maybe this stranger would make dinner more interesting. Everett glanced at the empty chair, at the space that might have always been his if different choices had been made. "I wouldn't want to intrude, please." Luis piped up, unexpectedly. "Mommy always gets boring grown-up food. Maybe you like chicken fingers?" The innocent request nearly undid him. His son, and God, he couldn't stop thinking those words. His son wanted him to stay, wanted to share chicken fingers and conversation, unaware. He was inviting his father to dinner for the first time in his life. Everett slid into the booth before he could talk himself out of it. The vinyl squeaked under his weight, and suddenly he was closer to them than he'd been in 5 years. Close enough to see the faint freckles across Luis's nose, the way Marisol's hands trembled as she adjusted her silverware, the careful distance she maintained even in the confines of the booth. "So," he said, voice steadier than his racing heart, "tell me about yourself, Luis. What do you like besides chicken fingers and spaghetti?" The boy launched into an enthusiastic list. Dinosaurs, soccer, his best friend Marcus, a dog named Biscuit he'd met at the park. Normal 4-year-old interests delivered with an animation that made Everett's chest ache. This is what he'd missed. These stories, this enthusiasm, this unguarded joy in sharing small details of a small life. Marisol watched them interact with an expression caught between fear and something else. Hope? Regret? Her fingers worried the edge of her napkin, and twice she started to speak before stopping herself. The waiter appeared, breaking the spell momentarily. Luis ordered his chicken fingers with the confidence of a regular. Marisol chose a salad she probably wouldn't eat. Everett heard himself ordering the carbonara, his usual, though food was the last thing on his mind. When they were alone again, Luis had discovered Everett's watch, a Rolex that probably cost more than most cars. But the boy wasn't impressed by its value, just fascinated by the way the second hand moved in tiny increments. "My dad has a watch," Luis said casually, still studying the timepiece. "But I never seen it. Mommy says he's very busy." The words hit like shrapnel. My dad, present tense, as if Everett was just absent, not absent from existence entirely. Marisol's face crumbled for just a moment before she recovered. "Luis, remember we talked about this. Some families are different." "I know," the boy said, unconcerned. "Marcus has 2 dads. Jenny has just a grandma. I have Mummy." He looked up at Everett with those devastating eyes. "What kind of family do you have? If you've ever faced a life-changing moment, one where the truth hangs in, the balance and every word matters, let me know in the comments below. Because right now, Everett Caldwell stood at the edge of such a moment, with his possible son asking about family, and the answer might change everything. Everett's hand trembled as he excused himself from the table. "I just need a moment," he managed, his voice strained but polite. Luis waved goodbye with tiny fingers that mirrored Everett's own, while Marisol's gaze followed him with unmistakable dread. The restaurant bathroom was mercifully empty, stark white tiles and chrome fixtures, offering a cold contrast to the emotional hurricane brewing inside him. He locked the door, leaned against the sink, and stared at his reflection. The man looking back seemed different somehow, older, his face etched with questions he'd never thought to ask. His phone was in his hand before he realized it, thumb finding Sam's number automatically. Sam Peterson had been his best friend since college, the one person who knew both. Everett the CEO and Everett the man. The phone rang 3 times before Sam's voice broke through. "Everett? It's nearly 9. Don't tell me you're still at the office." Everett's laugh was hollow. "No, I'm at Giovanni's. Sam, His voice caught. "How did you even begin this conversation?" "I just ran into Marisol." "Marisol? Your ex-wife Marisol?" Sam's surprise was evident. "That's unexpected. You okay?" "She's not alone." The words came out in a rush. "There's a boy with her, a little boy who looks exactly like me." The silence on the other end stretched for what felt like minutes. "How old?" Sam finally asked, his voice now deadly serious. 4.5. He'll be 5 in January. Everett closed his eyes, leaning his forehead against the cool mirror. "Do the math, Sam. It adds up. Those last weeks before we separated." Jesus Christ. Sam's whisper carried the weight of realization. "Ev, are you sure? I mean, resemblance can be coincidental." "It's not coincidence." Everett cut him off. "You'd see it too. It's like looking at my childhood photos. He has my eyes, Sam, my hands, even that thing I do when I'm concentrating. He bites his lip the same way." Water dripped steadily from a poorly tightened faucet, marking seconds that felt like hours. "What did she say?" Sam asked. "Did you confront her?" "Not yet." "He's right there, Sam. This innocent kid who has no idea." Everett's voice broke. "She called me her old friend. She's been telling him his father is just busy. What am I supposed to do with that?" Sam's breathing was steady, calming. "First, you need to be certain. You need to hear it from her. If this child is yours..." "If..." Everett laughed bitterly. "There's no if here. I know it. I felt it the moment I saw him. Then you need to talk to her, alone, without the boy present." Sam's voice became the voice of reason Everett needed. "But Ev, whatever you're feeling right now, shock, anger, betrayal, you need to keep it in check. If this is true, if he is your son, how you handle the next hour might determine your relationship with him forever." The weight of that statement settled on Everett's shoulders. A relationship with his son. a son he hadn't known existed until 20 minutes ago. "You're right," he acknowledged. "I need to stay calm. Call me after," Sam instructed. "Whatever happens, I've got your back." Everett ended the call and splashed cold water on his face. His reflection showed a man at a crossroads, the careful, controlled CEO giving way to something more primal, more human. The father awakening inside him. He straightened his tie, smoothed back his hair, and took 3 deep breaths. Then he unlocked the door and walked back into the restaurant, back to the table where his past and future sat waiting. His decision was made. Tonight, he would know the truth. When Everett returned to the table, Luis was happily demolishing his chicken fingers, while Marisol pushed salad around her plate. Her eyes met Everett's briefly, and he saw it clearly now. Fear, resignation, and the weight of a secret kept too long. "Everything okay?" she asked softly as he slid back into the booth. "Fine," he replied, his voice carefully controlled. "Just needed a moment." Luis launched into a detailed description of his kindergarten class, seemingly oblivious to the tension between the adults. Everett found himself responding automatically, asking appropriate questions, while his mind worked through what would come next. He wouldn't cause a scene here, not in front of the boy, his boy. But he needed answers. The opportunity came when Luis announced he needed the bathroom. Marisol started to rise, but Everett touched her wrist gently. "I'll take him," he offered, his voice brooking no argument. She hesitated, then nodded, pointing toward the back hallway. "It's just past where you were earlier." Everett guided Luis with a light hand on his small shoulder, feeling the fragile bones beneath his palm, marveling at how perfectly the child's hand fit in his as they navigated between tables. Outside the bathroom door, he knelt to Luis's level. "Do you need help, or can you manage?" Luis gave him a look of 4-year-old indignation. "I'm a big boy. I can do it myself." Everett couldn't help smiling. "Of course you are. I'll wait right here." As the door closed behind Luis, Everett leaned against the wall, heart pounding. Fatherhood, it was already happening in these small moments, these tiny acts of care. When Luis emerged, proudly announcing, "I washed my hands without being told," Everett felt a swell of irrational pride. Back at the table, he caught Marisol's eye and said quietly, "We need to talk. Outside. After dinner." She flinched but nodded, defeat written in the slump of her shoulders. Dinner concluded with forced pleasantries and Luis's cheerful obliviousness. When the check came, Everett insisted on paying despite Marisol's protests. As they prepared to leave, the rain had stopped, leaving the city streets glistening under lamplight. "Luis, honey," Marisol said gently, "can you sit on that bench for just a minute? I need to talk to Mr. Caldwell about grown-up stuff." The boy nodded, climbing onto a wooden bench near the restaurant's entrance, immediately distracted by a small toy car from his pocket. Marisol led Everett a few steps away, just out of earshot, but still within sight of Luis. Her arms wrapped around herself defensively, as if bracing for a storm. "Is he mine?" Everett asked without preamble, his voice low but intense. Marisol's eyes closed briefly, pain etched across her features. When she opened them again, tears glistened in the streetlight. "Yes," she whispered. "He's yours." Those 3 words landed like thunder in the quiet street. Everett felt his world tilt, reality realigning itself around this new, undeniable truth. He was a father, had been for nearly 5 years. "How could you?" The words escaped before he could stop them, raw with betrayal. "How could you keep this from me?" 5 years, Marisol. 5 years I didn't know my own son existed." She flinched but stood her ground. "I found out 3 weeks after we signed the divorce papers. You were in Tokyo, finalizing that merger you'd been working on for months. So, you decided I didn't deserve to know." His voice rose slightly before he caught himself, glancing at Luis, who remained thankfully absorbed in his toy. "I was going to tell you," she insisted, tears now flowing freely. "I had it all planned. I'd wait until you returned, meet you in person, explain everything." Her laugh was bitter. "But then I saw the announcement in the Financial Times, your company's expansion, your 5-year growth plan. There was a quote from you about being finally free to focus completely on business without personal distractions. Everett winced, remembering the interview. He'd been trying to reassure investors after the divorce, positioning it as a positive for the company. So I was just a personal distraction, Marisol's voice cracked. And I thought, what would our child be to you? Another distraction, a weekend obligation, someone to fit into your schedule between board meetings? That wasn't fair, Everett countered, fighting to keep his voice level. You never gave me the chance to decide what kind of father I wanted to be. I was protecting him. Her eyes flashed. You were absent even when we were married, Everett. Always at the office, always on calls. What kind of father would you have been? The accusation stung because it carried truth. He had been absent, had prioritized work over their marriage. But this was different. That wasn't your decision to make, he said quietly, his anger giving way to grief. He's my son, too. Marisol looked away, watching Luis, who had now discovered a puddle near the bench. I know, she admitted. I've known it was wrong every day for 5 years, but by the time I realized my mistake, it felt too late to fix it. Too late, Everett echoed. You could have called me yesterday, or last month, or last year. Any day would have been better than never. And say what? She faced him again. Hey, remember me? Your ex-wife? Surprise, you have a 4-year-old son you've never met. I was afraid, Everett, afraid you'd be angry, that you'd take him from me out of spite, or worse, that you wouldn't want him at all. Everett felt as if he'd been struck. You thought I wouldn't want my own child. How was I supposed to know? The man I married disappeared into Caldwell Industries years before we divorced. Her voice softened, and then it just kept getting harder. Luis started, asking about his dad, and I told him you were busy, important, working far away. The longer it went, the more impossible it felt to tell the truth. Everett looked over at Luis, who was now drawing shapes in the puddle, with his finger, his small face illuminated by the street lamp. His son, his flesh and blood. A child who thought his father was too busy to see him, when in reality, his father hadn't even known he existed. What does he know about me? Everett asked, his voice thick with emotion. Marisol wiped her tears with the back of her hand. That his father is a businessman. That he lives in the city but travels a lot. That he loves him very much but can't be with us right now. At least you got the city part right, Everett said, a sad smile touching his lips. Marisol, He faltered, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had been taken from him, what had been lost. I've missed everything, his birth, his first steps, his first words. I'll never get those back. I know, she whispered, genuine remorse in her voice. And I'm so sorry, Everett. More sorry than you can ever know. They stood in silence for a moment, 5 years of secrets and regrets hanging between them. What happens now? Marisol finally asked, her voice small. Everett looked from her to Luis and back again. Now, he said with quiet determination, I meet my son. Properly. Luis looked up as they approached, his small face curious. Are you done with grown-up talk? He asked, putting his toy car back in his pocket. Everett knelt before the bench, bringing himself to eye level with his son. The resemblance was even more striking up close, those eyes, that determined, little chin, the way his eyebrows drew together in question. Luis, Marisol began gently, sitting beside her son on the bench. Remember how we talk about your daddy sometimes, how he's a busy businessman who lives in the city? The boy nodded, glancing between his mother and Everett with growing curiosity. Well, Marisol continued, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill over, this is your daddy. His name is Everett. Time seemed to stop as Luis processed this information, his young mind working to connect. The stranger before him with the mythical father figure from his mother's stories. You're my daddy? He finally asked, his voice small but clear. Everett felt his throat constrict, tears pressing hot behind his eyes. Yes, he managed. I'm your daddy. Luis tilted his head, studying Everett with an intensity that belied his young age. Why haven't you visited before? Were you on a really long trip? The innocent question nearly broke Everett. How to explain something he himself was still struggling to comprehend. He glanced at Marisol, who gave a small, encouraging nod. Everett began, choosing his words carefully. I didn't know where to find you, but I'm here now, and I'm very, very happy to meet you. Luis considered this, his small brow furrowed in concentration. Then, with the simple acceptance that only children can manage, he asked, Do you like dinosaurs? A laugh bubbled up from Everett's chest, surprising him with its warmth. I do like dinosaurs. T-Rex is my favorite. Luis's face lit up. T-Rex is cool, but Triceratops is better. They have 3 horns. He held up 3 small fingers for emphasis. 3 horns is pretty impressive, Everett agreed, his heart expanding with each word exchanged. Maybe you could tell me more about them sometime. I have books, Luis announced proudly, and models in my room. Mommy helped me paint them. I'd love to see them, Everett said, meaning it more deeply than he could express. Luis looked to his mother for confirmation. Can Daddy come see my dinosaurs? Marisol's eyes met Everett's over their son's head, a silent conversation passing between them. Yes, she said softly. Your daddy can come see your dinosaurs. Maybe this weekend? Luis clapped his hands in excitement, then, without warning, launched himself off the bench into Everett's arms. The sudden weight of his son against his chest, small arms wrapped trustingly around his neck, broke something open inside Everett. He held the boy close, breathing in the scent of children's shampoo and chicken, fingers, feeling the quick beat of his son's heart against his own. I knew you'd come, Luis whispered in his ear, with the absolute certainty only a child could possess. I asked Santa for you last Christmas. Everett closed his eyes against the rush of emotion, holding his son as if he might disappear. Over Luis's shoulder, he saw Marisol watching them, her own tears falling freely now. I'm sorry I took so long, Everett whispered back, his voice rough with feeling. But I promise I'm not going anywhere now. Luis pulled back to look at him seriously. Pinky promise? He extended his tiny pinky finger. Everett hooked his much larger finger around his son's. Pinky promise. As they walked toward the subway, Luis between them, small hand held securely. In each of theirs, Everett felt as if he were walking through a dream. His son's voice chattered excitedly about school and friends and the field trip to the aquarium next week, ordinary details of an extraordinary life he'd known nothing about just hours ago. At the subway entrance they paused. This was where they would part for now, Marisol and Luis to their apartment. In Queens, Everett to his penthouse overlooking Central Park. The distance seemed both geographic and symbolic. I'll call you tomorrow, Everett said to Marisol. We have a lot to figure out. She nodded, appreciation in her eyes that he wasn't demanding immediate solutions. Thank you for, she gestured vaguely, for being kind about this. You have every right to be furious. Oh, I am, he admitted quietly, so Luis couldn't hear. But that's between us. He deserves better than our anger. Luis tugged on Everett's sleeve. Are you coming on the train with us, Daddy? The word, Daddy, still sent a shock through Everett's system. He knelt down again. Not tonight, buddy, but I'll see you very soon to check out those dinosaurs, remember? Luis nodded solemnly. Don't forget. I could never forget, Everett promised, gently brushing back a lock of hair. From his son's forehead, a gesture that felt somehow ancient and brand new. As he watched them descend into the subway station, Luis turning to wave one last time before disappearing from view, Everett stood motionless on the sidewalk. The city continued its relentless pace around him, but inside, everything had changed. Have you ever discovered a secret that changed everything? A truth that rewrote your past and redirected your future in an instant? Share your story in the comments below, because as Everett was about to learn, the discovery is just the beginning. It's what happens next that truly defines us. The city night embraced Everett as he walked home, his steps automatic while his mind replayed every moment of the evening. Each block brought new questions, new emotions crashing through the careful walls he'd built around his heart. By the time he reached his penthouse, he'd cycled through anger, grief, joy, and back to anger again. Sleep proved impossible. At 2 a.m., he found himself on his balcony, staring at the glittering skyline and the dark void of Central Park below. His phone felt heavy in his hand as he dialed Marisol's number, knowing it was too late, but unable to wait any longer. She answered on the second ring, her voice alert despite the hour. "I knew you'd call," she said softly. "I haven't slept either. I need to understand," Everett replied, his voice raw with emotion. "All of it. From the beginning." The silence stretched between them, filled with 5 years of unspoken truths. "I found out 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized," Marisol began, her voice steady but quiet. "You were in Tokyo closing that deal you'd been working on for months. The one you missed our anniversary for." Everett winced, remembering the bitter fight that had followed, one of many that had led to their separation. "I sat in the doctor's office alone," she continued. "When he confirmed the pregnancy, I felt terrified. We had just signed papers ending our marriage. The ink was barely dry. "You could have called me," Everett said, fighting to keep accusation from his tone. "I drafted the email a dozen times," Marisol admitted. "I wrote out what I would say when you returned from Tokyo. But then that interview came out in the Financial Times." Everett closed his eyes, remembering the quote that had apparently sealed his fate. Finally free to focus completely on business without personal distractions. Those words cut deep. "Everett, they confirmed everything I feared, that our marriage had been a distraction from your real passion, that our child would be too. It was just PR," he protested weakly. "The company stock was shaky after news of the divorce. I was reassuring investors." "Maybe," she acknowledged, "but it felt true. You'd chosen your company over us so many times before. The missed dinners, the cancelled vacations, the middle-of-the-night phone calls that pulled you away. Remember our anniversary in Napa? You spent most of it on conference calls." The memories stung because she wasn't wrong. He had prioritized Caldwell Industries above everything, convinced he was building a legacy, securing their future. In the process, he'd lost the very people that future was meant to include. "I decided to wait," Marisol said, "just until the baby was born. Then, I'd tell you." "But you didn't," Everett said, his voice tight. "No," she admitted. "When Luis arrived, when I held him for the first time, I became protective in a way I never imagined possible. I looked at your life from the outside, the endless travel, the 70-hour work weeks, the profile in Forbes calling you Manhattan, his most driven CEO, and I couldn't see where a baby fit into that world." Everett's throat constricted. "That wasn't your decision to make." "I know that now," she whispered. "But back then, I convinced myself I was protecting him, and the longer I waited, the harder it became to find the right moment." How do you tell someone they've been a father for 6 months, a year, 2 years? Each milestone made it more impossible. Everett's hand gripped the balcony railing, knuckles white. "I missed everything, Marisol. His birth, his first steps, his first word, Dada," she said quietly. His first word was Dada, even though he'd never met you. The revelation hit Everett like a physical blow. He'd been present in his son's life only as a story, a ghost, an absence explained away with business trips and important meetings. "I started creating this fiction," Marisol continued, "that you knew about him but were just too busy with work to visit often. It felt kinder than the truth, that his father didn't know he existed." "Did you ever think about what was kind to me?" Everett asked, grief sharpening his words. "I thought about you every day," she answered simply. "Every time Luis smiled your smile or tilted his head like you do when you're thinking hard. But my fear always won out. Fear that you'd be angry, that you'd use your resources to take him from me, or worse, that you'd be indifferent." The accusation in her last words hung between them, uncomfortable because they both knew it held a kernel of truth. The man he'd been 5 years ago might have seen fatherhood as an inconvenient detour from his carefully plotted course. "I'm not that person anymore," Everett said finally. "I'm starting to see that," Marisol replied. "The way you looked at him tonight. I've never regretted my decision more than I did in that moment." As dawn broke over the city, Everett stood watching the sky lighten, feeling both emptied and filled. The past couldn't be rewritten, the lost years couldn't be reclaimed, but the future, his future with his son, was just beginning. "Where do we go from here?" he asked. Saturday morning arrived with golden autumn sunshine streaming through Everett's penthouse windows. He stood in his kitchen, coffee untouched, checking his watch for the 4th time in 10 minutes. Today marked his first official visit with Louise, their first planned time together as father and son. He'd barely slept, his mind racing with questions. What would they do together? What if Louise didn't like him? What if the initial acceptance had been childish politeness that would evaporate in daylight? His doorman called up at exactly 10 a.m. "Mr. Caldwell, your guests are here." The elevator ride to his floor must have taken only seconds, but to Everett, it felt like hours. When the doors finally opened, Louise burst out ahead of Marisol, eyes wide as he took in. The massive penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows, showcasing the Manhattan skyline. "You live in the sky," Louise exclaimed, running straight to the windows, pressing small hands against the glass in wonder. Everett chuckled, tension melting slightly. "It does feel that way sometimes." Marisol stood awkwardly at the entrance, clutching her purse. "We can pick him up at 4, she said. "Unless that's too long?" "It's perfect," Everett assured her, then hesitated. "Unless you want to stay?" She shook her head. "This is your time with him. I'll be back later." After she left, Everett turned to find Louise examining his collection of antique chess pieces with curious fingers. "Do you like chess?" Everett asked. Louise shrugged. "What's chess?" And just like that, Everett realized he knew nothing about entertaining a 4-year-old. His apartment, perfectly designed for impressing business associates, contained exactly 0 child-friendly activities. The perfectly white furniture suddenly seemed like a terrible mistake. "What do you like to do for fun?" he asked, kneeling to Louise's level. "Dinosaurs," Louise replied immediately, "and Legos, and the park, and ice cream." Everett smiled. "Well, we can definitely do the park and ice cream. Let me grab my coat." Their first outing to Central Park was a study in contrasts, Louise running freely along the paths while Everett, usually, confident commanding boardrooms, followed cautiously, terrified of losing sight of his son for even a second. When Louise wanted to climb a rock formation, Everett hovered nearby, hands outstretched, ready to catch him if he fell. Other parents gave knowing smiles, recognizing the telltale anxiety of a novice. "Look how high I am, Daddy," Louise shouted from the top of a boulder that suddenly seemed mountainous to Everett. "That's great," Everett called back, his heart in his throat. "Maybe come down now?" The day passed in a blur of playground adventures, hot dog vendors, and Louise's endless questions. By mid-afternoon, when they stopped for promised ice cream, Everett realized his cheeks hurt from smiling so much. Louise, chocolate smeared around his mouth, looked up suddenly. "Do you have to go away again after today?" The question caught Everett off guard. "No, buddy. I'm going to be here from now on." "Promise?" Louise asked, doubt clouding his eyes. "I promise," Everett said firmly. "I might have to work sometimes, but I'll always come back." Louise nodded solemnly, then offered Everett a bite of his ice cream. A gesture that felt significant somehow, a small trust being extended. Not all visits went so smoothly. The 3rd time Everett picked up Louise, the boy was cranky from missing his nap. Nothing Everett tried could soothe his tears or frustration. Feeling helpless, he finally called Marisol. "He's crying, and I don't know why," Everett admitted, feeling like a failure. "I've tried everything." "Does he have his blue blanket?" Marisol asked. Everett checked the backpack she'd sent along. "No blanket. It's his comfort object," she explained. "He can't nap without it." "I'll bring him home," Everett said, defeated. "No," Marisol countered. "This is parenting, Everett. Sometimes it's hard. Try putting on some quiet music and rocking him. Talk softly about something boring. Trust me." Feeling skeptical, Everett tried her suggestion, holding his sobbing son against his chest while swaying gently, murmuring about quarterly financial reports. Miraculously, within minutes, Louise's crying softened to hiccups. then to the deep breathing of sleep. As his son slept against him, small hand curled trustingly on his shoulder, Everett felt an unfamiliar emotion swell in his chest, a fierce protectiveness mingled with profound love. This tiny person depended on him completely, trusted him implicitly. He vowed then never to betray that trust. Each visit taught Everett something new about Louise and about himself. He learned that Louise loved strawberry jam but hated grape jelly, that he could name every dinosaur in his books but still struggled with the letter R, that he was afraid of the vacuum cleaner but fearless on the playground slide. There were difficult moments too. The first time Louise had a meltdown in public, screaming on the floor of a toy store when Everett said no to a fifth dinosaur figure. Everett found himself utterly unprepared. Other shoppers stared with judgment as he tried reasoning, then pleading, with his inconsolable child. An elderly woman approached, her eyes kind. "Pick him up," she advised quietly. "Hold him close until the storm passes. He needs boundaries, but also your calm." Embarrassed but desperate, Everett followed her advice, gathering his flailing son into his arms despite the protests. He held Louise firmly but gently, whispering, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere," until gradually the tantrum subsided. Later, over ice cream, a peace offering Marisol later told him wasn't. At the best parenting strategy, Louise looked up with reddened eyes. "Are you mad at me?" "No," Everett answered honestly. "I was frustrated, but I'm not mad. I love you no matter what." The words came naturally, surprising him with their truth and simplicity. Louise nodded, accepting this assurance with the straightforward faith of childhood, and returned to his ice cream as if nothing had happened. 6 weeks into their new relationship, the breakthrough came unexpectedly. Everett had created a makeshift fort in his living room using sheets and furniture, something his own father had never done for him. Inside their canvas castle, flashlights illuminating their faces, Louise asked the question Everett had been dreading. "Why didn't you visit me when I was a baby?" Everett's heart clenched. He and Marisol had agreed to be honest with Louise in age-appropriate ways, but this moment came sooner than expected. "I didn't know about you when you were a baby," Everett said gently. "If I had, I would have been there every day." Louise considered this. "Mummy didn't tell you?" "No, she didn't," Everett confirmed, careful not to inject blame into his tone. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes because they're scared or confused." "Were you sad when you found out?" Louise asked, his eyes wide in the flashlight glow. "I was sad about missing time with you," Everett admitted. "But I was also very, very happy to find you." Louise nodded, processing this with surprising maturity. Then he crawled into Everett's lap, wrapping small arms around his neck. "I'm happy you found me too, Daddy." In that moment, inside a fort made of bedsheets and promise, Everett felt something broken inside him begin to heal. As autumn deepened into winter, Everett's life reorganized itself around Louise. His assistant received new standing instructions. No meetings before 9 a.m. or after 4 p.m. on school days. Wednesdays and weekends were blocked entirely for family commitments. Board members raised eyebrows at first, but Everett's firm stance left no room for negotiation. "Good morning, champ," became Everett's daily wake-up call to Louise, phone, pressed to his ear as he simultaneously reviewed overnight market reports. These morning check-ins quickly became sacred ritual for both of them. "Daddy, I had a dream about robots," Louise might announce, "or my tooth is wiggling, or it's show and tell today, and I'm bringing my special rock." Everett absorbed each detail, storing them away like precious data. He kept a journal of these conversations, determined not to miss any more milestones, no matter how small. Weekends developed their own rhythm. Saturday mornings meant pancakes, first at a diner near the park, then eventually in Everett's kitchen, with Louise standing on a chair to help mix batter. Their first cooking attempt ended with flour covering every surface and pancakes that resembled abstract art more than circles. Everett, who once fired an assistant for bringing him coffee at the wrong temperature, found himself laughing as Louise accidentally dropped an egg on the floor. "Oops," Louise said, eyes wide with worry. "Oops indeed," Everett agreed. then showed him how to clean it up rather than calling for a housekeeper. These weekend visits gradually extended. One night became 2, then entire weekends, requiring transformation of Everett's spare office into a proper bedroom for Louise. They painted it together, Louise insisting on dinosaur green walls. Everett, in his oldest clothes, let Louise direct the project despite his inefficient painting technique. The result was imperfect but entirely theirs. Everett never missed a school event. He sat uncomfortably on tiny chairs during parent-teacher conferences, beaming with pride when Ms. Carson praised Louise's creativity. He cheered loudly at the winter concert, where Louise played a tree with exactly one line, which he delivered perfectly. He volunteered for field trips, finding himself suddenly responsible for 5 kindergartners. At the Natural History Museum, all demanding to see the T-Rex simultaneously. "Mr. Louise's dad, I need the bathroom." "Mr. Louise's dad," Jacob pushed me. "Mr. Louise's dad, can dinosaurs eat ice cream?" By day's end, Everett, who regularly negotiated multi-million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, was exhausted but exhilarated, watching Louise point excitedly at exhibits, proudly introducing my dad to classmates, filled a space in his heart he hadn't known was empty. As Christmas approached, Louise faced his first school vacation divided between parents. The logistics were complicated, feelings still raw. Everett suggested they celebrate together, not as a couple, but as Louise's parents. "We could do Christmas Eve at my place," he offered during pickup one Friday. "Then Christmas morning at yours. I'll leave before lunch." Marisol hesitated. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" "It's not about us," Everett said quietly. "It's about him not having to choose." Christmas Eve in Everett's apartment marked another first, his first time hosting a family holiday. He overcorrected dramatically, hiring decorators to transform the minimalist space into a winter wonderland, complete with a 12-foot tree and custom stockings. "It looks like Santa's workshop exploded in here," Marisol commented when she arrived with Louise. Everett grinned sheepishly. "Too much?" "It's amazing," Louise shouted, running from decoration to decoration in pure joy. That night, after Louise finally fell asleep waiting for Santa, Everett and Marisol sat awkwardly in his living room, the ghost of past Christmases between them. "You've changed," Marisol observed, sipping hot chocolate. "The Everett I knew would have delegated Christmas to an assistant." "The Everett you knew didn't understand what mattered," he replied simply. Christmas morning brought Louise bouncing on Everett's bed at dawn, then racing to the tree. Watching his son's face light up with each gift, Everett couldn't remember why he'd ever found client appreciation presents more important than this pure, uncomplicated joy. Later, at Marisol's smaller but equally festive apartment, they shared a quiet moment in her kitchen while Louise played with new toys. "Thank you," she said, unexpectedly, "for making this easy for him." "That's what we do now," Everett replied. "We make things easy for him, even when they're hard for us." It was the first of many compromises, many adjusted expectations, as they built new patterns around their son's needs. Each successful navigation strengthened their co-parenting foundation, creating stability where once there had been only absence. Spring brought rain-washed skies and tentative new beginnings. Louise thrived with both parents actively involved in his life. But beneath the surface, Everett and Marisol still carried wounds that needed addressing. Their conversations, once limited to logistics about Louise's schedule, gradually expanded into more difficult territory. One evening after Louise went to bed during Everett's weekend, Marisol arrived early for pickup. Finding her son still asleep, she accepted Everett's offer of coffee on the balcony. The city lights sparkled below them like earthbound stars. "He asked me yesterday if we would ever all live in the same house," Marisol said, breaking their comfortable silence. "Like Marcus's parents do." Everett's grip tightened on his mug. "What did you tell him?" "That families come in different shapes, and ours has 2 homes where he is loved very much." She paused. "Was that right?" "It was honest," Everett replied. "I think that's what matters most now." The mention of honesty hung between them, an acknowledgement of past failures on both sides. "I need to apologize properly," Marisol said suddenly, turning to face him fully. "Not just for keeping Louise from you, but for not trusting you enough to tell you the truth. I made assumptions about who you were, what you'd do." Everett watched a helicopter's lights cross the night sky before responding. "Your assumptions weren't completely unfounded," he admitted. "I was obsessed with work. I prioritized everything above our marriage. That doesn't excuse what I did." "No," he agreed gently, "but it helps me understand it." They sat in silence again, the city's distant hum providing background to their thoughts. "I was so angry at first," Everett confessed. "Those first few weeks after finding out, I consulted lawyers." "Did you know that?" Marisol paled slightly, but shook her head. "I wanted to punish you," he continued. "To take Louise away, make you feel what I felt, the loss, the betrayal." He sighed deeply. "But then I realized that would only hurt him, and hurting him to punish you would make me exactly the kind of father you feared I'd be." Tears glistened in Marisol's eyes. "When did you get so wise?" "Probably around the third time Louise asked why the sky is blue and wouldn't accept." "Because that's its color." As an answer, Everett replied with a small smile. They both laughed, the tension easing between them. "I'm not the man I was 5 years ago," Everett said more seriously. "Losing you, losing us, changed me, though I didn't fully realize how until now." "And I'm not the scared woman who hid her pregnancy," Marisol responded. "I'd like to think we've both grown." These conversations continued over the following months, sometimes planned, sometimes spontaneous. They excavated old hurts carefully, examining them in the light of who they had become rather than who they had been. When anger surfaced, they acknowledged it without allowing it to dictate their actions. When grief over lost time emerged, they permitted its expression without dwelling in regret. One Sunday afternoon, while Louise napped after an exhausting morning at the zoo, they found themselves discussing their divorce for the first time since reconciling as Keo parents. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd tried harder?" Marisol asked, arranging animal crackers on a plate for when Louise woke up. Everett considered the question seriously. "I think we both stopped fighting for our marriage before we realized it was in trouble," he said finally. "I blamed my absence on work. You blamed the distance on my priorities. And neither of us really talked about the fear underneath it all." "Fear?" Marisol questioned. "I was afraid of failing," Everett admitted. "At business, at marriage, at life. Work was the one place I felt completely in control. The more our relationship struggled, the more I retreated to that safe space." "I was afraid too," Marisol confessed. "Afraid of loving someone who couldn't fully love me back. Afraid of being second place forever." They were quiet for a moment, absorbing these truths. "Do you regret it?" Everett asked carefully. "The divorce?" Marisol considered this, her eyes drifting to the doorway where Louise's laughter could often be heard. "I regret how we handled it," she said finally. "But no, I don't regret the path that led us here. I like who we're becoming as parents better than who we were as spouses." The honesty was refreshing, free from bitterness or accusation. They were different people now, shaped by loss and discovery, mistakes and redemption. Co-parenting counseling might help, Everett suggested one day after a minor disagreement about Louise's bedtime schedule. "Not because we're doing badly, but because we could always do better." Marisol agreed, and their monthly sessions became another building block in their reconstructed relationship. The counselor helped them establish clearer boundaries, better communication, patterns, and consistent approaches to parenting across two households. "You two are unusual," Dr. Winters commented during their third session. "Most divorced couples I see are still fighting their marriage battles through their children. You seem genuinely committed to moving forward." "We lost too much time already," Everett explained simply. By summer's arrival, they had created something neither had imagined possible. A friendship built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and genuine care. Not the passionate love of their early marriage, but something equally valuable, a partnership focused entirely on Louise's well-being. The true test came when Everett began dating again, a development that caught him by surprise. Jessica, a children's book author he met at a publishing event, asked him to. Coffee after an engaging conversation about dinosaur stories for preschoolers. One coffee became weekly meetings, which eventually evolved into proper dates. Before introducing her to Luis, Everett did something that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. He called Marisol for advice. "I wanted to talk to you first," he explained awkwardly. "About Jessica meeting Luis. It feels important to get your perspective." The old Marisol might have reacted with jealousy or defensiveness. Instead, she asked thoughtful questions about Jessica's experience with children, her understanding of their co-parenting arrangement, and her expectations moving forward. "Just take it slowly," Marisol advised, "and make sure she understands that you and I come as a package deal where Luis is concerned. We do, don't we?" Everett realized aloud. "Come as a package deal. The strangest family package ever," Marisol agreed with a smile. "But it works." Luis's 5th birthday arrived on a perfect January morning, crisp and clear, with just enough fresh snow to make the city look magical. For weeks, he had talked about nothing else, his excitement growing with each day crossed off on his dinosaur calendar. Everett and Marisol had planned the celebration together, combining resources to create a day their son would remember. The morning began at Marisol's apartment with special birthday pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, Everett's now perfected specialty. Luis, still in dinosaur pajamas, clapped with delight when Everett added chocolate chip eyes to his Triceratops stack. "This is the best breakfast ever," he declared, syrup already sticky on his chin. They exchanged knowing smiles over their son's head. These small moments of joy, once taken for granted, now treasured, had become the foundation of their new family structure. The day continued with Luis's first trip to the American Museum of Natural History's special dinosaur exhibition. Everett had arranged a private tour before public hours, allowing Luis to explore without crowds. The guide, recognizing Everett's name from a recent donation, gave special attention to their small group, answering Luis's endless questions with remarkable patience. "Look, Mommy, this one has a neck like a giraffe," Luis called, pulling Marisol toward a massive Brachiosaurus display. "Daddy, come see." Everett caught up, placing a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. "That's amazing, buddy. Did you know that dinosaur was one of the tallest creatures ever to walk on land?" Luis's eyes widened with wonder. "Even taller than you?" "Much taller than me," Everett laughed. "Even taller than our apartment building." Throughout the day, they navigated the comfortable choreography they developed over months of co-parenting. Marisol knew exactly when Luis needed a snack to avoid crankiness. Everett recognized the early signs of overstimulation that preceded meltdowns. They moved as a unit, not a traditional family perhaps, but a functioning one nonetheless. The birthday party itself was held at a children's play space that afternoon, a modest gathering with 5 of Luis's kindergarten friends, plenty of dinosaur decorations, and a cake shaped like a prehistoric landscape. Everett, who once commanded rooms full of executives without blinking, found himself slightly terrified by the chaos of 6 5-year-olds high on sugar and excitement. "They're like tiny tornadoes," he whispered to Marisol, as they watched Luis and his friends roar at each other in a game of pretend. "How do teachers manage whole classrooms of them?" "Patience, boundaries, and probably secret superpowers," Marisol replied with a grin. When present time arrived, Luis opened each gift with theatrical excitement, thanking his friends just as Marisol had coached him. His final present, a joint gift from both parents, was a child-sized paleontologist kit, complete with tools, a lab, coat embroidered with Dr. Luis Caldwell, and a promise of a summer trip to a real fossil dig site in Montana. "Now I can be a real dinosaur scientist," Luis exclaimed, immediately putting on the lab coat that reached his ankles. Later, after friends had departed and Luis was contentedly arranging his new treasures, Everett found himself standing beside Marisol, watching their son with identical expressions of pride. "We did good today," he said quietly. He's happy because he has both of us now," Marisol replied. Properly, as if sensing their conversation, Luis looked up and beckoned them both. "Come see my dinosaur museum," You have to pay tickets to enter." They obediently approached, accepting imaginary tickets from his small hands. Luis guided them through his carefully arranged collection, providing detailed commentary on each plastic creature's habits and diet. "And this one," he said, holding up a T-Rex, "is the daddy dinosaur. And this one, a Stegosaurus, is the mommy dinosaur. And this tiny one is the baby dinosaur. They don't live in the same cave, but they still love each other, and they still love the baby dinosaur the most in the whole wide world." Everett and Marisol exchanged glances, both recognizing their own situation translated into Luis's innocent dinosaur family. "That's a very nice family," Marisol said gently. "It's the best kind of family," Luis declared with absolute certainty, placing all three dinosaurs together in his small hands. Through a child's eyes, their unconventional arrangement made perfect sense. Not broken or incomplete, but simply their own unique version of family. In that moment, watching Luis create his dinosaur family with complete acceptance of its structure, Everett felt a surge of gratitude for second chances, for the opportunity to rebuild what had been lost in a new and perhaps stronger form. If you believe in second chances, in the possibility that what's broken can be reassembled into something beautiful and meaningful, like this video, because Everett and Marisol's journey shows us that families come in all shapes and arrangements, and sometimes the path to healing wins through unexpected territory. The Caldwell Industries boardroom gleamed with polished mahogany and morning sunlight. Executives in perfectly tailored suits arranged themselves around the massive table, their voices hushed in anticipation. Everett Caldwell sat at the head, reviewing quarterly projections with his usual precision, unaware that this ordinary Tuesday meeting would soon present him with the most significant decision of his career. Chairman Douglas Wilson entered last, his silver hair catching the light as he took his seat opposite Everett. The room quieted immediately. "Let's begin with the European expansion update," Wilson announced, nodding to the CFO, who launched into a detailed presentation about market penetration and growth metrics. Everett listened attentively, making occasional notes, until Wilson cleared his throat during a pause in the presentation. "Before we continue, I'd like to discuss a strategic personnel decision." Wilson's gaze fixed on Everett. "As you all know, our London office has become our fastest-growing international hub. We need strong leadership there, someone who understands our corporate vision and can execute it without constant oversight." The air in the room shifted subtly as executives exchanged glances. This was clearly not a spontaneous announcement. "Everett," Wilson continued, "the board unanimously agrees that you are the ideal candidate to head our London operations." Silence descended as all eyes turned to Everett, whose expression remained carefully neutral despite his racing thoughts. "We're prepared to offer a comprehensive package," Wilson pressed on. "Senior COO position, significant salary increase, equity options that would vest over 3 years, and accommodations in Kensington. The assignment would be minimum 2 years, with quarterly visits back to New York for board meetings." 2 years. The words echoed in Everett's mind as he calculated what that meant. 104 weekends, away from Luis, countless bedtime stories untold, soccer games unattended, milestones missed. The very things he'd promised never to sacrifice again. "This is quite unexpected," Everett said carefully. "When would you need my decision?" "End of the week," Wilson replied. "We'd want you in London by month's end to facilitate transition." A month. Barely enough time to prepare Luis for such a monumental change, if he agreed at all. The meeting continued, but Everett's thoughts remained fixed on the choice before him. 6 months ago, he would have accepted without hesitation, viewing it as the natural progression of his career. Now, every professional consideration was balanced against a 4-foot tall counterweight with dinosaur pajamas and his mother's smile. After the meeting, James Chen, the company's younger VP of marketing, caught up with Everett in the hallway. "Congratulations on the London offer," he said, his tone slightly mocking. "Though I guess Super Dad Everett will have to hang up the cape now, huh? Can't run a European division while coaching Little League." Everett stopped walking, turning to face Chen fully. "Is there something you wanted to discuss, James?" Chen shrugged. "Just surprised they'd offer it to someone who's clearly gone soft. The Everett Caldwell I used to know wouldn't have hesitated. The Everett Caldwell you knew didn't have a son," Everett replied evenly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have calls to make." Back in his office, Everett stood at the window overlooking the city. For 15 years, Caldwell Industries had been his identity, his purpose, the measure of his success. The London position represented everything he'd worked toward: international, prestige, expanded authority, financial security that would last generations. Yet, as he watched the city below, he found himself thinking not of corporate strategy or market expansion, but of Louise's face when he'd had to cancel their museum trip due to an emergency board meeting. The disappointment had been brief. Louise was remarkably understanding, for his age, but it had lingered in Everett's mind for days afterward. His assistant knocked lightly, entering with a stack of documents requiring his signature. "These need to go out today," she explained. "And Dr. Wilson would like 10 minutes on your calendar this afternoon to discuss the London transition details." "Hold off on scheduling that," Everett replied, surprising himself with the decision forming in his mind. "And please clear my calendar for the rest of the day. There's something I need to handle personally." Alone again, Everett opened his desk drawer and withdrew 2 photographs. One of Louise on his shoulders at the Central Park Zoo, both of them laughing, the other of Louise and Marisol at the dinosaur exhibit. Their matching smiles captured in perfect, joyful symmetry. These images, not the awards lining his office walls, had become the true measure of his success. The realization settled over him with surprising clarity. There was no decision to make after all. It had already been made the moment he'd promised Louise he wouldn't disappear. When Wilson called later that afternoon, Everett's response was firm but respectful. "I appreciate the board's confidence," he said, "but I must decline. My commitment is here in New York, with my family." "Family?" Wilson echoed, surprise evident in his voice. "I wasn't aware you'd remarried." "I haven't," Everett replied, "but I have a son I want to raise, and that can't happen from London." The silence that followed felt significant, not disapproving, simply processing this unexpected information. "I see," Wilson finally said. "That's admirable, Everett. Unexpected, but admirable. The offer remains open should your circumstances change." Everett thanked him politely, knowing his circumstances wouldn't change, only his priorities had. As he left the office that evening, earlier than usual, Everett felt lighter than he had in years. Tomorrow there would be questions, perhaps consequences for his decision, but tonight he was simply a father heading home to call his son and tell him about his day. Everett didn't call ahead. Some news needed to be delivered in person. He stopped for takeout from Louise's favorite pizza place, adding a bottle of wine for himself and Marisol, then drove directly to her apartment in Queens. The modest brick building stood in stark contrast to his Manhattan high-rise, yet lately it had begun to feel more like home than his own residence. Marisol answered his knock with surprise, dressed casually in jeans and a faded NYU sweatshirt. "Everett, we weren't expecting you until Friday." "I know," he said, holding up the pizza box. "Surprise Wednesday dinner, if you haven't eaten yet." Louise appeared behind his mother, eyes lighting up at the sight of both Everett and pizza. "Daddy," he shouted, launching himself forward for a hug that Everett caught expertly, balancing food in one hand and child in the other. "Hey, buddy, I missed you today." "You saw me yesterday," Louise reminded him seriously, as Everett set him down. "That was still too long," Everett replied, ruffling his hair. Marisol watched them with curious eyes as she cleared space at the small kitchen table. Something about Everett's demeanor suggested this wasn't just an impromptu visit. Over pizza, Louise dominated the conversation with detailed descriptions of playground politics and his teacher's new haircut. Everett listened attentively, asking follow-up questions that delighted Louise with their specificity. When Louise finally excused himself to check on his new ant farm in his bedroom, Marisol turned to Everett expectantly. "Okay, what's going on? You never show up unannounced on weeknights." Everett took a deep breath. "I was offered a promotion today," head of European operations, based in London. Marisol's expression faltered, her hand tightening around her wineglass. London, she repeated. That's... Congratulations. When would you leave? I'm not going, Everett said simply. Her eyes widened. What? I turned it down. He leaned forward, his voice earnest. 2 years minimum in London, with quarterly visits back to New York. I'd miss everything, again. I'm not willing to do that. Marisol studied him carefully. That's a major career sacrifice, Everett. The position sounds perfect for you. 6 months ago it would have been, he admitted, but not anymore. Nothing is worth missing another day of Luis's life. Marisol's eyes glistened unexpectedly. You really have changed, she whispered. I had good reason to, Everett replied, glancing toward Luis's bedroom door. The best reason. They sat in comfortable silence until Luis returned, clutching a drawing. Look what I made at school, he announced, spreading a crayon masterpiece on the table. It's our family. 3 figures stood holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. This time, no figure was crossed out. All 3 stood together, smiling. That's beautiful, Luis, Marisol said softly. Miss Harper said families come in all different types, Luis explained earnestly. Some kids have 1 parent, some have 2 who live together, some have 2 who live apart. I told her, I have the best kind because I get 2 houses and my parents are still friends. Everett and Marisol exchanged glances over their son's head, a shared understanding passing between them. Luis, Everett said carefully, how would you feel if I picked you up from school tomorrow? I thought maybe we could go to that new dinosaur movie you've been talking about. Luis's eyes widened. But tomorrow's not your day. You always work on Thursdays. I'm making some changes at work, Everett explained. So, I can spend more time with you. Really? Luis bounced excitedly. Can we get popcorn? And those sour candy things? Absolutely, Everett promised, laughing. After Luis went to bed, Everett and Marisol sat on her small balcony, the city's glow illuminating their faces in soft light. Are you sure about this decision? Marisol asked gently. I don't want you to regret it later. Everett shook his head. I've had enough regrets to last a lifetime. I missed the first 4 years of his life, years I can never get back. I won't miss a single day more by choice. What did the board say? They were surprised, but not as much as I expected, Everett mused. Wilson actually called it admirable, though I suspect not everyone shares that view. Marisol smiled. Their loss is our gain. Luis's gain, especially. It's my gain too, Everett said quietly. I'm starting to understand that success looks different than I thought. It's not about corner offices or international postings. It's about being there when it matters. Marisol reached across the small table, squeezing his hand briefly. For what it's worth, I think you made the right choice. I know I did, Everett replied, his certainty absolute. As he drove home later that night, Everett found himself looking forward to tomorrow, his movie date with Luis, more than he'd ever anticipated any business success. The city skyline glittered against the night sky, the same view he'd admired countless times before, but somehow it looked different now. Brighter, perhaps, more full of possibility. Spring painted the city in vibrant colors, replacing winter's gray with cheerful blossoms and fresh green leaves. On a particularly perfect Saturday afternoon, Everett spread a checkered blanket along the grassy shore of the Hudson River. Manhattan's skyline glittered across the water, a backdrop to their impromptu family picnic. Marisol arranged containers of fresh strawberries and Luis's favorite peanut butter sandwiches, while Everett poured lemonade into plastic cups. Luis darted between them, alternating between chasing birds and helping, with picnic preparations in his enthusiastic, haphazard way. 6 months had passed since Everett declined the London position. Those months had brought changes, some challenging, others unexpectedly rewarding. He'd restructured his role at Caldwell Industries, delegating international travel to focus on domestic operations. The adjustment hadn't been without friction. Several board members questioned his commitment, and James Chen had made his disapproval known through thinly veiled comments about family men lacking true ambition. Yet for every professional challenge, personal rewards multiplied tenfold. He'd attended every one of Luis's t-ball games, taught him to ride a bike without training wheels, and built a routine where father and son shared breakfast 3 mornings each week before school. "Daddy, look," Luis called, spinning in circles with arms outstretched, his laughter carrying on the spring breeze. "I'm making myself dizzy." Everett watched his son's joyful circles, remembering their first awkward meeting at Giovanni's bistro. How far they'd come from that rain-soaked evening of revelations and recriminations. Marisol settled beside him on the blanket, following his gaze to their dizzy, giggling son. "Penny, for your thoughts?" "Just thinking about how different everything is now," Everett replied. "A year ago, I didn't even know he existed. Now I can't imagine life without him." Luis collapsed dramatically onto the grass, declaring himself super-duper dizzy before rolling toward them with grass stains accumulating on his clothes, stains neither parent bothered to mention. As they ate their simple lunch, Luis regaled them with elaborate stories about dinosaur adventures, crumbs flying from his sandwich as he gesticulated wildly. Everett and Marisol exchanged amused glances over their son's head, the easy comfort of co-parenting evident in their synchronized responses and shared understanding. Later, as Luis napped on the blanket between them, exhausted from play and fresh air, Marisol broke their comfortable silence. "We did all right, didn't we?" she asked softly. "Despite everything?" Everett watched the gentle rise and fall of his son's chest, the peaceful expression on his sleeping face. "Better than all right," he replied. "We found our way to where we were supposed to be all along. Not exactly the traditional family I imagined when we got married," Marisol admitted with a small smile. "No," Everett agreed, "but maybe better in its own way. More honest." Luis stirred slightly, mumbling something about dinosaurs in his sleep. Both parents instinctively reached to soothe him, their hands meeting briefly over their child's form. The touch was comfortable, friendly, the connection of two people bound not by romance but by something equally powerful, their shared love for the small person they'd created together. As afternoon sun turned golden across the river, Everett felt a profound sense of contentment wash over him. The future stretched before them, school plays and graduations, skinned knees and growth spurts, challenges, and triumphs they would navigate together as the unconventional but loving family they had become. His phone rang in his pocket, probably work, always something needing attention. But for once, Everett didn't reach for it. Instead, he watched a passing sailboat on the river, listened to his son, his peaceful breathing, and let the moment stretch into perfect stillness. Some choices remake a life entirely. For Everett Caldwell, the choice had been clear from the moment he saw his son's face in that restaurant. Family first, always. The path hadn't been straight or simple, but it had led them here, to this sunlit afternoon by the river, to peace hard-won through honesty and forgiveness, to a future bright with possibility. Luis opened his eyes, blinking sleepily up at his parents. "Can we get ice cream now?" he asked, as if continuing a conversation they'd been having in his dreams. Everett and Marisol laughed in perfect harmony. "Yes," they answered together. "We can get ice cream now." Time passes differently when measured in a child's growth rather than quarterly reports. As Luis grew taller and his questions became more complex, Everett and Marisol found their own relationship, evolving into something neither could have predicted on that fateful rainy night at Giovanni's bistro. The journey from strangers to Kyo parents hadn't been without challenges. There were disagreements about school choices, bedtimes and appropriate consequences for crayon masterpieces created on living room walls. Yet through each hurdle, they discovered that the very qualities that had once driven them apart, Everett's determination, Marisol's protective instincts, now strengthened their parenting partnership when channeled toward Luis's well-being. What began as a shocking revelation in a restaurant had transformed into a second chance at family, not the traditional arrangement. Either had once envisioned, but something uniquely theirs, built on honesty hard-won through mistakes acknowledged and forgiven. For Everett, the lesson came through surrendering the illusion of control. The corporate world had trained him to believe success meant mastering every variable, eliminating all uncertainty. Fatherhood taught him that true strength lies in embracing vulnerability, in admitting when you don't have all the answers but showing up anyway, day after day. Marisol learned that protection doesn't always mean shielding someone from potential pain. Sometimes the most loving choice is allowing connections to form, even when they come with risk. Her fear of Luis being hurt had nearly cost him the father who now stood steadfastly by his side. Together, they discovered that forgiveness isn't a single moment, but a continuous choice, choosing each day to see beyond past mistakes to the future being built together. Their story reminds us that families aren't defined by perfect beginnings but by the commitment to grow through challenges, to prioritize love over ego, connection over convenience. Perhaps the most profound transformation happened in Luis, who never questioned the unconventional shape of his family. He simply accepted the abundance of love surrounding him, moving confidently between two homes where he was cherished completely. His innocent perspective offered the wisest lesson of all: that family is defined, not by structure, but by presence, not by perfection, but by genuine care. Life rarely offers perfect solutions to complicated problems. Relationships fracture, secrets emerge, hearts break. But when we choose courage over comfort, when we prioritize connection over being right, we create space for healing that transforms broken pieces into something new and beautiful. If this story touched your heart today, take a moment to share it with someone who might need reminding that second chances are possible, that it's never too late to rebuild what matters most. Leave a comment about a time when forgiveness changed your life, and subscribe to hear more stories that celebrate the messy, imperfect journey of becoming truly human. Because in the end, Everett and Marisol's story teaches us that sometimes the most powerful words aren't "I was right," but simply "I'm here now," spoken with humility and followed by consistent action. Love, when chosen daily over pride, can heal what once seemed permanently broken and create something even stronger in its place.